but Humby, who's, been a little bit of a badass, he kind of threatened me, that, Whitty, if you want to preach here again, you're just going to have to get connected to pop culture. And so, with that, I watched my first episode of The Walking Dead recently, and it was this one. I had to watch it on Netflix. And after I saw it, it was really pretty disgusting. It was like, God, who would watch this stuff? And somebody else told me, man, I rearranged my whole life to watch The Walking Dead every week. And I thought, okay, that's just weird. Who does that? And then, how you forget how connected you are to culture? I remembered, I bet you I am more zombie-like than any of you in this room. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person who has ever eaten the raw entrails of a freshly butchered goat in Africa. Anybody else? You ever done that? Yeah, the kidneys, to be specific. It is Maasai cuisine, and it is their version of zombie lore. And so I realized that I'm actually ahead of Doug, not behind him. And that is a goal in my life. Seriously though, it's easy to be zombie-like, and some of us may be more zombie-like than we really think. And for the purposes of today in the talk, The Walking Dead, to be zombie-like is to resign yourself to just an average existence. It's just to sort of exist. It's going through the motions of your life, but with that feeling that the life has really been sucked out of you. As I thought about that with some of the friends of mine that I've been sitting around the table with in various settings here of recent, I thought about a friend who is living a zombie-like life. He's a man who grew up on the west side of San Antonio. He grew up angry, he grew up fighting, and he brought that into his marriage. And although he has really been going through a major life rewrite and reformation in his life, it came a little late, and his wife is still filing for divorce on him. Or I thought about a friend of mine that I meet with every Monday morning, and I'm amazed how sometimes when I walk into the restaurant and I see Craig, I'm just amazed at how exhausted he is. And as I've heard his story, I've learned that his exhaustion comes from the depression that his own wife struggles with and how he is grasping at straws to try to figure out how to show his wife love, even when she's living in a depression. Or yesterday, I sat at the table with a woman who told me about how her parents abandoned her when she was just the tender age of 4 years old. And they abandoned her for her life work. And what they did is every day they would come home late, and so they would send her to stay with the neighbors. And in the course of doing that, she was abused. And she told the story of how she would see her parents come home through the bedroom window of the neighbor's house, but instead of coming getting her, they would just let her stay there. And her whole life since then has been the search for affection. And she's over 3 relationships now. She hasn't found it yet, what she's looking for. Or yesterday, I listened to the story of a lady who, when she told her story, her opening line was, "My father was a raging alcoholic, and my mother knew nothing about how to nurture us, and they left us to just grow up wild." And because of her parents' incompetency about how to be a mother and a father, she has suffered her entire life because of that. Now, it would be easy for my friends to just give up and resign themselves to their existence. And in this case, to perhaps a very below average existence. And one of the first things that I want us to see today is how easy it is for you and me to live a zombie-like existence. Recently, a woman came into the ER where my wife Linda works, and she was in so much pain. She was just crying out. And pretty quickly, the nurses realized what she was doing, that really she was just using the ER as a place to try to get a fix for her drug addiction. And so they set her aside mentally and emotionally, and they kind of compartmentalized her, and she felt their judgment. And she felt like no one understood. But Linda she's different, I'm telling you. When she goes to work every day with a purpose in mind to look for people that God puts in her way that she can serve. And Linda served this woman. And so as she was being discharged from the hospital, and Linda helped her out to the car, just before she got in the car, this woman desperately reached up and grabbed Linda's hand, and she said, "Linda, this isn't me. This isn't me." And then she told Linda the backstory of what had happened to her 2 years earlier. This woman had come home from work, just as many of us do, late in the afternoon. And when she got there and opened the door to her house was a complete wreck. It had been turned upside down. And the thieves who had done that were still inside, and she didn't know it. And when she walked in, these men turned her life upside down, and they beat her mercilessly and broke both of her shoulders. Can you imagine that? And as a result, she had to have shoulder replacements. And in the process of rehabbing from that, she became addicted to pain medication. Her lot in life was not what she wanted. It wasn't what she thought it would be. She knew that it had left her in a condition of resigning herself to this way of living, trying to cope every day. And she knew this was not the person that she really was. It's easy to fall into a zombie-like state of resigning ourselves to a very average life. And so today I want to ask you, is the life you're living really you? Is the story you're telling with your life, is it the story that you really want told? Have you just resigned yourself to exist? And maybe most importantly, does God know, and does He care? In Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 to 22, we read about a seemingly insignificant encounter between Jesus and His first followers. Jesus had begun preaching what we call the gospel of the kingdom, announcing to the Jewish people that God's Messiah was coming and that the kingdom was close at hand. And He did much of this preaching around the Sea of Galilee. And in chapter 4, we read about an encounter that He had with His early disciples. One day as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, He saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed Him. A little further up the shore, He saw two other brothers, James and John, sitting in a boat with their father Zebedee, repairing their nets, and He called them to come too. They immediately followed Him, leaving the boat and their father behind. Now, this story seems pretty insignificant. In fact, it surprises me a little bit that in this encounter, how these boys, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and they were just teenage boys, it kind of surprises me how immediately they just left everything and left their father in the boat and went and followed Jesus. In fact, they almost seem a little bit like ungrateful sons looking for any excuse to get out of work. Anybody ever done that before? Okay, that's kind of what these guys look like when you first read it. And it would be easy for us to sort of judge them as wimps, as weak boys, as, they don't know how to work, don't have a work ethic, until we hear the rest of their story too. You see, in Jesus' day, it was the dream of every Jewish family that their sons would grow up to be rabbis. To be a rabbi was to be a teacher of the Jewish law and the tradition and of the Old Testament scriptures. And the role of a rabbi, the career of a rabbi, was one of those really highly held and valued careers like some that we have today in our culture as well. And so to that end, Jewish boys were put through a very rigorous process of training and preparation. In fact, from the ages of 5 to 19, these Jewish boys memorized almost the entire Old Testament. First, they had to memorize what was called the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and then they memorized the rest of the Old Testament, and of course, they did this in Hebrew. Well, at the end of those 9 years of training, these boys would go and they would interview with a rabbi. And what would have happened is while they were in school, they would see certain rabbis, and of course they would talk about who the greatest rabbis were, and they would go to a rabbi of their choosing and ask him if they could follow him as a disciple. Well, those rabbis, what they would do is they would interview these young men, and they would ask them questions and test their knowledge and see how sharp they were. And if they thought that these boys had what it took to be their followers, they would say something like this. They would say, "Come and follow me," just what Jesus said to Peter, Andrew, James, and John in our story. And these boys would immediately leave everything and begin to follow that rabbi everywhere he went and everywhere he taught. However, if you went to a rabbi and you asked him to follow you, and he interviewed you, and he felt like you didn't have what it took to be his follower, he would say something like this to you. He would say, you obviously love the Torah, and it's clear that you have studied and tried very hard, but why don't you just go home and join the family business? Why don't you go ahead and take a wife and have children, and maybe one of your sons will grow up to be better than you? Now, can you imagine the discouragement of being told that you weren't good enough? Can you imagine some of the humiliation that they felt? I remember back in my late 20s, Pastor Dave and I had been studying with a teacher in in Houston named Dave Anderson. And Dave had a mentor, Professor Zane Hodges. And this man was legendary. And one day, Dave told us, he said, "Hey, I'm going to Dallas to meet, Professor Hodges. Would you boys like to come?" Well, we were like puppy dogs, it's like, yeah. And boy, our tails were wagging and our tongues were out. And it was like, we're going to get to meet the great Professor Zane Hodges. So we made the trip up there, and we went and ate at a restaurant. And after too many glasses of iced tea, Dave excused himself to go to the boys' room. Well, Professor Hodges felt like he ought to say something to us. It had been awkward to just sit there. And so he said, "I hear you boys are studying with Dave." And, we smiled and kind of puffed our chest out, and like really proud of what we were doing. And he said, if you guys continue to study with him, in 10 years, you might be able to help somebody. And it was like, Dave and I looked at each other. It's like, what? We've only lived 28. And in 10 years, if we keep trying, we might be able to help somebody. We thought we were doing pretty well. We've kept track of it, and I'm about to get my first person helped, and Dave hadn't quite made it yet. But, we're working at it still. It was a little discouraging to be told, you know what, you don't quite have it yet, but if you keep trying, maybe you will. You ever been discouraged like that? Anybody ever told you that you didn't have what it took, or made you feel that way? Or maybe no one ever said it to you, but just somewhere deep inside you kind of feel that you're not quite up to the standard of someone else? Peter, Andrew, James, and John didn't have to imagine what it was like to feel that you weren't good enough. Every day they went to work in the family business, it reminded them that they didn't have what it took. Every day they went to work in the family business, it reminded them that they had no choice but to resign themselves to be fishermen. Every day they must have felt a little zombie-like the life had been sucked out of them. Every day they lived with a little discouragement, a little failure, a little loss of identity, with resignation that this was their lot in life and that there was nothing they could do about it. That is, until Jesus came along. Because when He came along, they came alive. Grace broke in on them. Jesus looked beyond their recent failures, and He challenged them to live their best life possible. Following a rabbi was the dream of their life, and when Jesus came along, He gave them a second chance to attain it. That's why when He challenged them to follow Him, and they immediately left everything and did so with their Father's blessing. This was the dream of their life. And yet I wonder why Jesus would choose these men. Because they were fishing, it was obvious they had already joined the family business. It was obvious they didn't have what it took. It was obvious that they hadn't made the cut, that other rabbis had already rejected them as not good enough. Why would Jesus invite men like that to follow Him? Why would He offer them a second chance? Why would He offer you and me a second chance? Well, to answer that question, I want to paint for you the scene of one of my favorite movies, The Count of Monte Cristo. Maybe you've seen it. It's years ago. In the movie, a young French officer named Edmond Dantes had been betrayed by his closest friend. And as a result, Dantes ended up in the notorious prison called the Chateau d'If. Every prisoner was held in solitary confinement in a cold gray stone cell. They were fed a poor soup ration once a day, and in those conditions, they lost all contact with other human beings, with life as they had known it, and to a man, almost every one of them went crazy. Not only that, but although they came from Catholic France, and most men who were brought into that prison came with some kind of a faith in God, after several years, most of them lost their faith, giving up all hope that God knew or that He cared or that He would intervene in their life in any way. This happened to young Dantes as well. He lost his faith, he lost his hope in God, and he resigned himself to his fate. However, after several years in prison, Edmund was surprised one day when a priest and former soldier in Napoleon's army accidentally tunneled into his private cell. And over the next 8 years, Edmund and the priest worked together to dig out of the prison. And in exchange for Edmund's help, which would multiply the rate of escape in twice as fast, the priest educated him. You see, part of the reason that Edmond Dantes had been thrown into prison was because he was illiterate. He didn't know how to read and write, and he couldn't protect himself. And so the priest agreed that he would educate Edmund. He would teach him how to read, that he would teach him mathematics and economics, and that he would teach him philosophy, and most importantly to Edmund, that he would teach him hand-to-hand combat with the sword. Also, over these many years, as they dug in that dark tunnel, and as Edmund recalled the story of what had happened and how he had been brought to the prison, the priest helped him understand who had actually betrayed him. And when he found out that it was his best friend, revenge welled up in his heart, and he knew that if he ever escaped the Chateau d'If, that he would find and destroy all those who had consigned him to this hell on earth. Well, one day, as they dug, nearing the edge of the prison walls, close to freedom, the tunnel caved in and fatally wounded the priest. It crushed his lungs. But before he died, he gave Edmund two things. The first thing he gave him is he gave him a map to buried treasure that that meant if Edmund ever escaped, he would become a fabulously wealthy man. And the second thing he gave him was a warning, a piece of advice. And with his lungs punctured, he kind of spoke in a raspy voice. And he said, Edmund, do not do the crime for which you are now serving the sentence. God says vengeance is mine. And Edmund, when he heard the name of God, he stopped the priest and he said, but priest, you know I don't believe in God. To which the priest responded with his final breath, it doesn't matter. He believes in you. None of us want to resign ourselves to an average existence. And because God believes in us, we don't have to. And we call that grace. God is an absolute miracle worker when it comes to rescuing us from our past, from our failures, from our broken dreams, from our nightmares, from our pain, and from our loneliness, and from our worst ways. He sees in us what no one else sees. He knows what He created you to be. And even if you don't believe in Him, or if you no longer believe in yourself, He believes in you. And that's why 2,000 years ago, Jesus voluntarily gave up His life so that you can get your life back. And so I ask you today, do you want your life back? Do you want the life that God intended for you, that He created you for? Do you know that the life you're living isn't you? And do you want to rewrite the story of your life with a second chance? Do you want it badly enough that, like Peter, Andrew, James, and John, at His call, you would leave everything to follow Him? Some years ago, living in Africa as a missionary, I nearly resigned myself to just exist. For 10 years, Linda and I had dreamed of being missionaries. We had worked toward it. We had gone to school. We could think of almost nothing else. And within 3 years of getting on the mission field in East Africa, I nearly quit. It happened because of the junk in my life. I was self-centered. I was self-righteous. And I made a series of quick decisions that left me facing some dead-end career options. And one of them turned out so badly that I turned into a zombie-like state. Now, it may not sound like it to you, but in that state of just trying to exist and survive the pain of my own decisions, I escaped into the world of playing golf. It became an addiction. It's what I loved to do. In fact, I came to love golf more than God, and I am not proud of it, but it's the truth. For a time, I came to love golf more than I love my own family. I played it so much, I became really good. And I was invited to play in all the biggest tournaments in Kenya. And the biggest tournament in Kenya was held every year on Easter weekend. Now imagine, I'm a missionary, right? I mean, you would think the least I would do is go to church, right? For 3 years straight on Easter weekend, the one weekend when everyone else went to church, I didn't go. Instead, I was playing golf. I eventually met a pro golfer and seriously considered giving up God's work for golf. At the time, it seemed like a really good thing to do. But I know now that had I done it, I would have simply been settling for an average existence. Over time, by telling and unpacking my own story, and with the help of friends, and understanding my worst ways, God helped me rewrite the story of my life. And He can help you too. It's not just me. Remember those friends I mentioned at the top of this talk? Roland and Craig and Christy and Kelly. None of them have resigned themselves to an average existence. Every one of them is fighting their way through the pain in their lives to follow Jesus. You know, I would love, if there were anything I could hope for you, it would be that many of you would refuse to simply exist. That instead of just getting up every day and going to work to a job that you hate, that you would find what God has called you to. That instead of just living in a marriage for the kids' sake or for some financial benefit, knowing that when the kids leave home, you're going to part ways, I would hope for you that you could find the love that once led you to marry anyway. Or for those of you that are in and out of relationships looking for love, looking for affection, looking for security in your life, I would pray that you could find your security in a God who loves you deeply and who calls you to follow Him. Maybe today you would take your first step toward a second chance at your dream by responding to the challenge of Jesus to enter into a life-altering relationship with Him. Do you want a second chance? Do you want to live more than just an existence? Do you really want to get your life back? If you do, today we've created a place for you here at the front. And as Jesse plays, I want to invite you to come and meet Jesus here and hear the challenge of His call to you.
You know my heart, you know my soul, you know my mind and all that it holds. You know how hard I try. You know where I am, you know where I've been, you know these eyes and all that they've seen. You know how hard I try. Lord, teach me to love you all the way. Lord, teach me to love you all the way. Oh, I want to know you more. I'm hanging on to every word you say. Oh, I want to love you all the way. You know my heart, you know my soul, you know my mind, all that it holds. You know how hard I try. Teach me to love you all the way. letting go. I'm letting go. I'm letting go now, Lord. I'm letting go. I'm letting go. I'm letting it all go. Lord, teach me to love you all the way. Lord, teach me to love you all the way. Oh, I want to know you more, hanging on to every word you say. I want to love you all the way.
You know, when Jesus first called these young men, what they heard is they heard a second chance. And what first drew them was their chance to live out their dream. Do you know what happened to these young men over the next 3-4 years of their lives? They moved from simply seeing how they could get a chance to live out their dream to loving Him all the way. They fell in love with Jesus, and it changed their life. And I would wish the same for us today. God created us for Him, for Himself. He created us to know Him. And that's why when we find Jesus, that's why when He finds us and when He reminds us again that He believes in us, it calls forth this love from us for Him. Lord, I pray for us today that for those sitting in this room who know that they have fallen into a zombie-like state, who are walking every day among the dead, Lord, I pray today that they would find life in You, the one true giver of life. Lord, thank You for believing in us. Thank You for loving us. Thank You for dying for us. Thank You for challenging us to follow You. Lord, I pray that we'd have the wisdom to leave everything and follow You. Lord, for those who are hurting today, can't quite see their way out, I pray that You'd give them understanding about their lives, how they got to where they are. Pray that You'd give them the wisdom to know the next step to take in following You. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. As always, our prayer leaders will be here at the front. If God's spoken to you today and you just need to talk to someone a little bit more, we want to invite you to come. This is a great place to do that, to pray together. And also, I just want to add my word of thanks to what Humby said earlier about your giving. You know, a couple of months ago, we really challenged the people of City Church to step up their giving. And I want you to know that it is making a difference. Your children are being served today because of your giving. We've been able to partner with people all around the globe, in Africa, in Russia, in South America, because of your giving. The stories of people's lives are being rewritten because of your giving. You're a part of this. And we appreciate it so very much, and we want to say thank you for that. This week, if you walked in as a zombie, I hope you walk out differently today. Don't eat any raw kidneys, okay? Maasai zombie lore. Just leave that to me. It's not that bad. The cooked ones are worse. We hope you have a great week. and be blessed by God. You're dismissed. See you next week.